All right. Welcome to the Resource Sufficiency Evaluation Enhancements Phase 2 Track 2 training. My name is Cynthia Hinman, and I'm going to be leading you through this training. My apologies for the late start and the password requirement. Those are those unexpected things that happen. This training is being recorded, so folks who come in late will be able to get the full training if they miss the beginning. My name is Cynthia Hinman, and my producer is Dottie Vance. Dottie Vance is my producer, and we'll be looking for your hands raised and your comments in the chat, and make sure that we answer all of your questions. I also have subject matter experts on the line who are going to be able to help me with all of our questions. So I'm continuing to let people in the meeting. I'm sorry, I keep stopping here. A few housekeeping rules. Let's move on to that. So please keep yourself muted at all times to minimize your background noise. Of course, if you have a question, we will have question sections, so please jump in and ask a question at those times. You can just unmute yourself, or you can raise your hand and Dottie will make sure that I see that you are out there with a question. So let's start with an overview of our SEE Phase 2 Track 2. So it contains two elements. They're identified as 2A and 2B. 2A is a clarification of post-HASP low priority exports, and this concerns rules that were implemented in Track 1 and related to scheduling priorities and interchange transactions. And this initiative is clarifying what's required, and it also streamlines that process. 2B is the capacity test failed to start rule exemption, and this covers exemptions to the failed to start rule, which I will explain. As a matter of fact, I'm going to start with item 2B before we cover item 2A, because 2A has all the market sim scenarios, and we'll talk about those in the following section of the training. So we're going to start with 2B, then we'll move on to 2A.
Hey, Chico. Busca Santi. All right, come on in.
Okay. Could you please mute your phone if you are in this training, and we'll open it up for questions at the Q&A session. So item 2B, the capacity test failed to start rule exemption flag. So first, we're going to get some background by reviewing Phase 1 and the enhancements, and then why we needed this flag for in Track 2. Next, we'll provide instructions on how to apply for this exemption if you're eligible. And finally, I'm going to give you some references for more information about the failed to start rule. I also want to mention that if you were in our RUG or settlement user group meetings and you looked at the training slide, you'll see that there was a pre-training release survey where you could ask any questions you might have prior to the training so that we could cover those questions during the training. So thank you to those who did send those questions in, and I'll be providing answers as we go along. So let's start this item 2B by looking back at what we did in RSEE Phase 1. Okay. So in RSEE Phase 1, the bid capacity test was enhanced to see if resources that are online for the whole RSE horizon from the previous FMM run are actually online, meaning they are zero or non-zero telemetry at the time of the RSEE test. So in RSEE Phase 1, we implemented this check to see if resources were online or not, so they could be counted for the next RSE evaluation test. So we were counting them if they seemed to be online. So if a resource's telemetry was 0 or negative at the time of the RSE test, its capacity was not considered, so it was not counted. And in most cases, that works fine. But the problem was that some resources can be available in a shorter amount of time than the timing of this check. So we wanted to provide an exemption to those resources so that they would be counted for the RSE test. And the background here is that there were a couple of resources, they were hydro resources with this situation, and the ISO ran a script to enable this rule to exempt them. And what we're doing here was actually we're putting in a master file flag so that you can sign up for this. We can automate the process rather than making it manual. So let's take a look at what the requirements are. Okay. So it's available to resources that have 0 or negative telemetry at the time of RSE run, but can be online in time for the next test. So what you'll need to do if you are eligible for this is to submit an updated generator resource data template. And I have an example below here, column DH. You're going to want to put a Y in there. I think the default is an N, and the ISO will approve that request within 5 to 11 business days. Now, we got a question from the training survey on this asking what information is required to be submitted to indicate we want to check the flag for non-positive startup telemetry. Well, this is a self-attestation. You don't need to provide anything. You can just put a Y in there and we will approve it. So we are taking your word for the fact that you are available in this short time frame. And then there was also a question that said, if the telemetry is non-positive for a couple of minutes only, would that count? Does 0 megawatts during startup count as non-positive? And the key point here is that the fail to start rule fires if a resource is at 0 or below when we take that RSE test. And so if that happens, it's considered as failed to start. So if the resource has the availability to be online, in that short period of time, then they can ask for an exemption to that rule. Now, there's a slide in our user group meeting, our RUG meeting, that provides a little more information, and I just wanted to share it with you so that we can make sure that you have all the information that you need. All right, so in the RUG meeting, you'll note that there was the master file, GRDT. There is the UI, adding a new resource-specific capacity test, failed to start rule exemption flag, and there's also the API available. So I'm going to open it up for questions and see what questions you have now. Dottie, are there any hands raised or any questions?
Perfect. I am looking in the chat, and I currently do not see any questions placed in the chat. Additionally, looking to see if there's any hands raised. Remember, you can use that WebEx feature. I do not see any hands raised at this time.
All right, perfect. So I'm going to, let me just do one more thing here. One moment, please.
I also want to note while you're doing that, that folks that are audio only, they can hit *6 to unmute on the audio line. So if you have a question through the phone, that's how you can unmute yourself. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
And Cindy, I just want to make sure if you're on mute.
I am on mute. Thank you very much.
Of course.
Okay, so I just wanted to mention that if you want more information about the counting rules, you can find that in RSCE Phase 1 Initiative Training, and I have a link here. And also, if you want to get more information about the logic for the availability check, this is included in the EIM BPM section 11.3.2. I believe there might be a PRR for putting this in market instruments too, because of course these all of these initiatives in RSCE Phase 2 Track 2 don't only apply to WEIM participants, they apply to all participants. I see that there is a question here in the chat, and I'll go over that. Question from Christine is, if a resource is in its startup sequence, adjusting valves or lining up equipment, this would mean the resource is not synced, but is in the startup procedure. Would this count as meeting the eligibility to designate? I am going to open that up and ask Michael Martin or Sherry Pryor, could you answer that question, please?
So, yeah, this is Michael. I can answer this one. The way we're talking about the failed to start exemption, the way the test works is it's not looked at until your first RTD dispatch is expected. So you should be producing megawatts at your PMIN at that time. The question when now, if it's 5 minutes before, and this is where we got into some issues with high-speed folks, is that last 5-minute dispatch wasn't counting a 0. But in a case where it's, let's say, a long start resource and you're working your way and you're producing megawatts, you're in a non-zero position, then you would not, it would not error. It would calculate correctly. Did that make sense, Robert? Or who asked the question?
Christine, did that answer your question? Oh, she has her hand raised. Christine, you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, thank you for answering my question. I just had a follow-up. So just to confirm, as long as the last 5 minutes before the start of the test, the resource is producing non-zero telemetry, we should be okay?
Correct.
Okay.
And in a case where it's, again, it's not a motoring situation, you know, hydro motoring where it might be negative, but in the next minute it could be at PMIN. That's what the intent of this exception is trying to capture. It's not going to affect, you know, a more traditional generator that's, you know, has an hour startup.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, it looks like Robert has your hand up. Can you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Cynthia, thank you very much for this training. This is Robert Fisher with NV Energy. Admittedly, I got a little lost with this functionality and the correlation with master file. Can you elaborate how the master file characteristic is supposed to work with this feature? Because they seem out of sequence.
Okay, I'll try to answer that. So essentially, if you are a resource that is capable of that short startup time, you know, that you would could potentially start up within the time after the test happens, but before that next interval, like a hydro or I guess a storage resource, I'm not sure, then you can just, I'm going to go back here, go to the GRDT and change column DH to a Y and submit that. I'm not sure what you mean by out of sequence.
Okay, that's helpful. So if you, so this is specific for the capacity test. And so if you submit a bid, and our quick start resource, you also have to have this flag on for that capacity to count towards the test? Question mark?
No. So this is, Robert, this is an exception. So we put the rule in, I guess it was beginning of the summer. The intent was, hey, if you got a startup and you take 2 hours to start and you're not doing anything and it's, it's the first interval and you haven't done anything, well, yeah, that capacity shouldn't be counted towards the next RSE test. So that was the intent. What we've run into is, and honestly, it's just some operational realities. There are some resources that can just go from, 0 to hero instantly, and we needed to just give them an exception to say, okay, we won't even consider you for this exception, use the right words, we won't consider you to fail for this test. You will never fail because of this, because you're so darn fast. And I tried to put it in language that made it super simple. Did that help?
It does, and I still have I'm still a little lost because my understanding of the bid capacity measurement is it's from the base schedule to the essentially upper operating or upper economic limit. And so I'm a little lost in the fact that you are now considering if a resource is committed or not, because the capacity test doesn't necessarily relate to that aspect because it's measured from the base schedule to the participating quantity.
Base schedule to participating quantity, correct.
Or upper economic limit. So how does the commitment adjust that calculation?
So and it's a huge example in the BPM. It's going forward looking, look, if you're looking in the next hour, well, your next reachable dispatch range is now this inclusive amount of megawatts. We shouldn't give you that. You haven't even paralleled yet.
So is this specific to the capacity test or capacity test and the flex ramp test?
I think it's only capacity test. I'm going to say 99%. Sure, I'm going to have to go back to BPM on that.
That is my understanding.
So just to state it a different way, you are now including intertemporals or physical capabilities on a capacity test when it's purely meant to be a capacity value. So kind of mixing the flex ramp test and a capacity test a bit.
Yeah, intertemporals could be considered in this because we're saying we're taking into physical characteristics of the resource, where your point is, well, it used to just be straight up bids.
Yeah, purely capacity.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, let me ponder that a bit. I may ask a further question. Thank you for the clarification.
Sure, and there's I'm sure you saw it, Robert, there's a big section in the BPM, and this went in last time, and it was one of those where, kind of as I mentioned before, when we hit some operational realities, we had to, consider, this will look good on paper, but we have some operational things we need to account for. That's how we got here.
Okay, what was this stakeholder? I mean, I'm getting older and I don't remember everything, but I don't recall this being stakeholder.
I think yes, it was. And what was interesting about it was at first, I mean, it just sounds so good on paper. It just makes sense. And I think the complication of it wasn't considered, you know, as deeply as we needed. And so I don't think it got I just don't think it got a lot of airtime.
Okay, thanks, Michael. Appreciate it.
All right, it looks like we have another question in the chat from John. How should QF resources, qualified resources, be handled? There isn't instantaneous telemetry for this, but instead the point of delivery is provided via after-the-fact meter data. These resources are online, but telemetry is not available. These resources are extremely old. So, Michael, can you address this question?
There isn't telemetry on a resource, and it's after the fact. I'm gonna ask. We're gonna have to take this one back and see.
Okay, thank you, John. We will back to you and everyone else with the response when I'll send information out after this meeting with a response to that. Okay, and then it looks like Christine has some examples to understand the change, and I will read her examples. Number 1, resource can start under 5 minutes, and 2, resource can start in over 5 minutes. Would number 1 qualify and not 2? And she said we can take this offline if needed. Does anyone, Michael or Sherry, anybody have?
You know, I have my opinion. I agree, but I'm going to say I don't know if it's up to me to make that call. So again, we better
Okay.
go back and get back to you.
That sounds good. We will send an email out with the answers to the questions that we don't get to in this meeting. I don't see any additional questions in the chat. Dottie, are there any hands raised that I didn't see?
I'm looking and there's currently no other hands raised at this time.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, so let us continue on. We're going to move on to our other change that comes with resource sufficiency evaluation phase 2, track 2. And that is item 2A, and that's the clarification of post-HASP block hour low priority exports. Such a long name. So we're going to start with a review of the e-tagging changes that were made in phase 2, track 1, not phase 1. This one was in phase 2, track 1. And we'll talk about the process and application enhancements that are going to be made. So first, let's do that review about the e-tagging changes that already occurred. So it required low priority exports to be e-tagged as firm provisional energy, which on the tag is G-FP, with the designation of the associated ISO real-time market priority. We'll talk more about that and we'll look at an example. It identifies non-firm exports with a lower priority that can be curtailed according to existing tariff rules within each operating hour and helps with the manual curtailment in an EEA3 event. We're going to expand on that a little bit. And then accounts for the capacity contribution of hourly low priority exports in the ISO's upward capacity and upward flex RSE. So now we're going to look and see what those e-tags should look like. So here we have the market path of a tag, and you see that the product is GFP. So in the market path, the product should be GFP, which is generation firm provisional power, and scheduling coordinators are required to enter in the ETAG market path.gfp for all of their low market priority types. So that would be the DA-LPT, the RT-LPT, and the RT-Econ. You can see those over on the right there. Those are the low priority types. You'll note that the DA-LPT has an asterisk there. That is going to be used for both those economic and those self-schedule. So both, that will be used on your tag for both DA-Econ and DA-LPT. So I also wanted to give a little more context to why we use that GFP, the Generation Firm Provisional Energy. So I grabbed some information from our Market Ops BPM section 6.3.2, and it says that the ISO can manually adjust this product under the following circumstances: restore contingency reserves following a contingency, deploy existing contingency reserves where a reprocurement of contingency reserves is deficient, and maintain reliability, including EEA3 condition where armed load is utilized to restore deficient contingency reserves in conjunction with ETAG curtailments in order to maintain required contingency reserves. So we had a couple of questions in the training survey questions. The first one is, are DA-Econ and DA-LPT curtailed pro rata, or does DA-LPT have the same priority as DA-Econ? And since DA-Econ will be tagged as DA-LPT, they're going to have the same priority. Second question was, since all day-ahead RUC awards are automatically self-scheduled in real time, are DA-Econ still even needed? And the answer to that is no, really, they are not needed. I also wanted to just mention, you know, we combine that DA-Econ and DA-LPT, and there are really some benefits to doing that. It provides less confusion about which priority to tag. Also, since they're combined, the ISO looks at them combined when we're considering curtailments. So, and these are based on the day-ahead ones are based on the cleared RUC values. So let's look at the rest of the tag next. Okay, so we see here that in the physical path of this tag, the miscellaneous info field is marked as yes, and there is in the miscellaneous info grid, there is the CAISO underscore priority underscore type. And when we have that marked as yes, we have to fill in a priority type, whether it is for a low priority export or any type, whether it's DAPT, DALPT, RTPT, RTLPT, or RT-Econ. So we need to make sure that is filled in. And then the tip that on the side there is that these fields are case sensitive. You always want to use uppercase, otherwise your tag will fail. So we want to make sure we're using the right case, and we want to make sure that that ISO priority type is filled in, CAISO priority type. So these are things that already existed in phase 2 track 1. Now, what are we doing in phase 2 track 2? So what was the problem we were trying to solve here? So ultimately, the operators needed visibility to the priority of the exports, so that when we have stress system conditions, they have the ability to adjust some exports if they need to. And why would they need to do that? And that is because they need to ensure there's enough megawatts to cover the ISO load requirements, and additionally to fulfill those high priority deliverability exports as well. So in this initiative, we're automating the ability for the ISO operators to see the priority of the ETAG awards in ITS and to make curtailment decisions more efficiently. And then also other VAs are going to get a truer picture of the certainty of their imports or our exports to them, right? They'll be able to see if there are firm provisional or not, you know. So what's really changing here? Well, first I'm going to talk about what's changing for the ISO, and then I'll talk about what's changing for market participants. For the ISO, the operators will be able to see the scheduling priorities in ITS and be able to filter so that they can make decisions about curtailment based on priority. Our market participants will have the ability to see that scheduling priority in ADS and CMRI. So that's going to help you fill in your tags. So it is a requirement that you put in the scheduling priority in your tags, because incorrect and or incomplete tags are going to fail the validation. ITS is going to check that market priority and the GFP in the market path, and the ITS will compare the GFP with the ISO priority in the token field of the tag. So what does that mean for you? Well, that means as a scheduling coordinator, you'll be able to refer to ADS and CMRI to get that scheduling priority for your interchange schedule. And also, you will need to create your e-tags for those interchange transactions, including the GFP and the priorities. So you're going to need to make sure that you fill that out properly. One tip I want to provide is a question that people often ask is, if HASP adjusts the final RUC schedule, the e-tag should reflect the HASP value and the DALPT market priority type. If additional HASP awards are received, they should be e-tagged separately with the appropriate real-time market priority type. This ensures that the DALPT e-tag receives the highest of the LPT curtailment order if in the event the post-HASP curtailments are necessary. There was a training survey question related to this, and I think this answers that question. So I hope if that is not the answer, does not cover your question, we will just submit a city ticket and we'll make sure we clarify that for you. Or you can ask the question here during the training. So there is a great document that was recently put out called, two documents actually, one of them called Scheduling Priorities Knowledge Article, and then there's also an FAQ. And there were a couple of things in there that I thought were pretty impactful for this particular training session. So I just wanted to bring these to your attention and highly recommend that you look at these documents if you have any questions about scheduling priorities. So the first one was, what conditions prompt scheduling coordinator priorities, prompt scheduling priorities for exports to be utilized? And then the answer is, scheduling priorities come into play when there is limited energy supply compared to demand. In such cases, both the day ahead and RUC and real-time HASP markets use these priorities to determine which exports may be needed to need to be reduced to maintain grid balance. Second question I wanted to point out, people ask us quite a bit, do schedule adjustments only occur during EEA conditions? And the answer is no. The ISO can adjust schedules even if an EEA condition is not in effect. Schedule adjustments can take place as a standard practice of the market clearing to ensure reliability of the energy grid. So I just wanted to throw those out there. Again, please take a look at these documents, and they will help you out if you have questions. I'm going to continue on to the end of this section, and then I will open it up for the questions. I see there are questions and hands raised. All right, so let's look at ADS first. What is ADS going to look like? So you can see that the priorities are going to be listed as new roles in the instruction type. So if you look at the bottom right, the instruction box, there are multiple priorities. You can see they are linked to one resource. So, and you'll have the opportunity to test this in the Market Sim as well. So you'll be seeing all those priority types in the instruction type in ADS going forward. Next, I'm going to show you some mock-ups of some CMRI reports. I'm hopeful that they will be ready for you when we get to Market Sim. I know we're working on that right now. First, there will be a new report for day-ahead rock export market priorities. You can see that this report will have the trade date and the resource. It will also include this new column or a column. It's a new report with that priority type. It also includes not only the low priorities, but all of them, as well as ETCs and TORs. So that will be available to you. We have a similar report in real time. Oops. A similar report in real time, and you can see we're looking at hour 1 here for these particular resources, and you can see that market priority types are listed there. Next, I again wanted to go to the what was listed in the RUG meeting. For these, you can see that there are both UIs and APIs for these particular reports. Okay, I am going to open it up for questions, and let me slide up here. Let's see, Christine's examples.
We do have one hand raised currently from Janice. If Janice wanted to unmute yourself and then ask your question.
Janice, you want to? Okay. Did you want to unmute yourself? Okay, I am not hearing the question. Did you say that was Janice, Dottie? Janice, yes. If you can put your question in the chat if you're having trouble with the unmute, that would be great. Are there any other hands raised?
I do not see any other hands raised at this time.
Okay, so go ahead. Okay, I thought I heard somebody else. All right, well, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to actually look at the Market Sim scenarios. And of course, we encourage everyone to participate in the Market Sim. As I mentioned earlier, this doesn't only impact WEIM participants, so I highly encourage you to participate in the Market Sim, particularly if you do exports or any interchange transactions, really. So let's run through the logistics, and then we'll talk about the scenarios. The registration to participate in the Market Sim has passed, but if you still want to participate in the Market Sim, we moved the date out, so please submit your request in the Market Sim at caiso.com mailbox as soon as possible. Attend Market Sim forum calls to stay informed on the timing of activities for this and other fall 2023 release initiatives. And as I mentioned, this Market Sim was going to start today, but it's actually starting on the 14th. if you're participating in the market sim and you have questions, you should use the market sim simulation fall 2023 functional environment. For those of you who are on RUG and market sim calls, you know that we've added some additional functional environments for releases and things like that. But if you have questions about this market sim and these scenarios, you're going to use the market simulation fall 2023. So let's go to the first scenario. The first and second scenarios I'm going to talk about together, and then I will stop for questions because the first two scenarios are very similar. They're both unstructured. This first scenario, we're looking at the auto approvals. So we're asking market participants to e-tag several exports, both low priority and those that are not low priority, and you're going to tag them properly. And then the expected outcome is that they will be validated properly in your tagging system, and the ISO operators will also verify ITS for the GFP tags. The second scenario is essentially the same, but this is where we're looking at the auto denials. Again, you're going to e-tag several exports, so you'll take the ones that have GFP, and you're going to put the not low priority exports in the miscellaneous info field and see what happens. They should be denied. Again, you can also e-tag several exports as other than GFP and put in those low priority exports. And again, you're going to want to verify those e-tags, and the ISO operators will also do that. So that's the first two scenarios. There are two more, but we're going to stop and see what questions you might have.
I do see currently a hand raised from Christine, if you wanted to come off mute and ask your question.
Hi, this is Christy Monahan again with SRP. I have a question about the timing. So for the simulation, if it's on the 14th, are we submitting the day ahead bids then on the 13th?
I believe that is true. Can someone validate that for me? Is Anshuman on the call? Yes, yes, that is true. You would submit those on the 13th. I got verification on that.
Okay, and the CMRI reports will be ready by the 13th then?
That's the plan.
Okay. And then are there specific hours that we should be submitting for, or are all of the hours going to be set up such that they'll?
I think for the tagging, any timing will be okay. However, there's one where we're going to set up an EEA3 condition, and I'll give you the dates and times, for that.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And just to confirm, so any bids that we submit that are economic for day ahead would be the same priority as self-schedules, LPT. And so if we receive the rep award, those should be tagged as day ahead LPT. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And then one final question, I think. So is it possible to submit other types like wheels, high priority wheels or low priority wheels just for comparison?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you for the questions. Sherry, did you have something additional to add? I see your hand is raised. Or did I cover what you were going to say? Okay. All right. Does anybody else have their hand raised?
Yes, we do have one other hand raised from Jen Yu, if you wanted to come off mute and ask your question.
Chen-Yu, I think you're still muted. Hello, I hear you now.
Oh, good. I just want to clarify if instrument is on the call about availability. Looks like the CMRI code will not be in the map stage until the 14th. So the answer, I'm just trying to understand the 13th day that will be CMRI will be available to view, because I just checked on the ROC presentation. Look like the code will not be available in the map stage until the 14th.
I am not sure if, okay, I just got a message here. It said CMRI will be available and code is targeted by 9/14.
Right, so if we were to go in on the 13th, then that means if any new reports, it wouldn't be showing up. I mean, that's my understanding.
Yeah.
Just want to clarify with the market sim coordinators. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a good point, Chen-Yu. And I encourage you, I'm sure you'll be on today's market sim call later this afternoon at 2 o'clock, and I'm sure you'll get the answer to that question then. How's that?
Oh, yeah, yeah. Thank you. I will not check until after the 14th. That's what I believe that's Christine's question, right?
Christine, I'm not sure what question you're referring to.
No, earlier I think Christine's question was whether she can check the CMI report on the 13th for that specific change.
Yeah.
That's why I chime in. I don't have a question. I thought this just wanted to clarify if instrument is on the call to make sure that market participants not misled by the
Yeah.
you know, the information. Yeah.
Yeah. Good point. So my response was I was thinking she was asking if for the day ahead for the 14th, if you needed to submit bids on the 13th, and the answer to that is yes. With regard to the CMRI report, I think we'll have more information on the market sim call this afternoon.
Yes, that's good. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. I know Janice, you said that you can unmute now, so if you could ask your question.
There, this is Denise Bacon with PAC. I have a question regarding, and I see part of the answer in the chat. So schedule adjustments that, let's describe it this way. Let's imagine someone exporting from the CAISO has their schedule reduced in the RUC process and then resubmits it into the HASP. Those HASP awards that are posted at roughly T minus or T60, then those are adjusted on the E-tags by 20 after. Is that what I'm reading correctly in the chat?
Sherry, you want to clarify your answer?
Yes, that's correct. So if you resubmit through the HASP process, and if you're not awarded, but you have a tag out there, it will adjust that to whatever the award is through HASP.
And is that the only adjustment, or should we potentially expect additional adjustments sub-hourly?
So any adjustments that are sub-hourly would be actual curtailments that we would be issuing if we were in an EEA3.
Okay, thank you.
All right. And it looks like Carly had a question and Sherry answered it. And I'm assuming that works for you, Carly, because you said thanks. But if you have an additional question, just let us know. Dottie, does anybody else have their hand raised?
Yeah, one more hand raised from Derek. So Derek, if you could come off mute, please, and ask your question.
Hi, this is Derek Hembry with MUD. Quick question about a resource-backed export. None of this will apply to that. So, and what I mean by that is we have resources located within the CAISO. We're external to the CAISO, and when we call on those in real time, we schedule them as such as a resource, high priority resource backed export. We would still do that as we do it via today's practice, that we won't designate them G-FP, etc.
GFP is for the low priority exports. I'm wondering if I can get one of my subject matter experts to address the rest of the question. If it's a high priority export, it's just going to be G- for firm transmission.
That's correct. It would be GF, and then in the miscellaneous token field where it has CAISO market priority or priority type, excuse me, you would have RT, PT.
Okay, perfect. I just want to make sure that, or just wanted to double check that those won't be pulled up into this automatic curtailment process.
No, those are the higher priorities.
Okay.
Right. Okay. I see another question. Derek, or, oh, that was just the question that we had. Is there an additional question, Dottie?
I do not see any other hands raised at this time, nor do I see any questions in the chat.
Okay, sounds good. All right, let's go on to the next scenario. Scenario 3 is a structured scenario. And for that, you're going to, first of all, let me give you some details on that. The structured scenarios will, at this point, are scheduled for September 14th, 9/14, which is the beginning of the market sim for this particular initiative. So you're going to need to submit your bids for the 14th, on the day ahead, bids on the 13th. And then the ISO will issue an EEA3 alert, and that's going to be between 3 p.m. and 5 p.m. And so for your real-time bids, SCs will submit bids at least an hour before that trading hour for 2 p.m. onwards. So you're going to tag several exports as firm provisional and put in the CAISO priority type as real-time econ, real-time LPT or day-ahead LPT, and then you're going to tag also some other than firm provisionals with DAPT or RTPT. We're going to, the ISO is going to have an EEA3 alert, and we will initiate pro rata curtailments of the low priority exports, those GFPE tags with the RT econ and RT LPT, day-ahead LPT priority types. The expected outcome is that you're going to check these in your the web smart tag system, and the ISO is going to verify ITS and make sure that everything was verified properly. So I'm going to stop for questions on this specific initiative. And I see, I have a question from Alex. It says, so if no adjustment in HASP, all the intra-hour adjustments must be due to EEA. Sherry, do you want to chime in on that one? Or Michael?
I just want to make sure I understand the question. If GFP is not adjusted in HASP, so in other words, HASP runs, and if HASP doesn't further reduce whatever priority that is, right? It could be a day ahead LPT. It could be a real-time LPT self-schedule or a real-time LPT economic bid. And we're saying whatever clears HASP, the question is the only time we could expect an intra-hour curtailment would be during an EEA3. Did I repeat that question correctly?
So Alex just raised his hand.
Yeah.
And
I apologize. maybe you didn't fat finger the question. I just wanted to make sure I understood. There was an earlier slide that said that these tags are susceptible to curtailment in conditions that are not an EEA. So there could be conditions where GFPs would be adjusted down. So I just wanted to make sure I understood. So they could be adjusted down in HASP at T-20, but if there is any intra-hour curtailment, that would be only due to an EEA.
So that's not quite true.
Okay.
Because we could have an instance where we actually lose transmission capacity, right? And we're now overscheduled. So as those same rules apply today, if we were derated on a transmission ITC constraint, then we may have to curtail, and it may include, any of those low priority, but it's not necessarily part of this EEA3, curtailments where we're trying to maintain our reserves. So it's a different task, kind of a different situation. So it's not entirely, because that could happen today, right? You could have an export coming out of the ISO, and if we lose that transmission capacity, then those would get curtailed. An example would be the PDCI, right? So if we lost the PDCI, we're going to curtail all of those schedules, and they could include some of those exports.
Is the priority of that curtailment then your contingency? Do you curtail these only once in order to arm, once you've armed your contingency spin?
It is an EEA3 condition, right? Where we are, if we're talking about just all of the low priority exports and we're in an EEA3, it is to prevent us from arming additional load, firm load, or if, to prevent shedding additional firm load. Those are when we will be curtailing those LPT exports.
Right, but are you, I guess my question is, do you curtail these after you deploy your contingency reserves? Qualifying events.
Yes, it is EA3 to prevent us from arming. So we're at the point where we're actually arming load for our contingency reserve.
So there will be an EEA announced prior to an intra-hour.
Yep. Yes.
Okay, so I'm trying to understand. So we could expect these to be adjusted down in HASP at T-20. If we make it through that T-20 window, we would be monitoring to see if there's any EEA declarations, to see if there's a potential for the firm provisional tags to get curtailed pro rata, right?
Correct, or loss of transmission. So you may see where if we have loss of, I'm using the PDCI again as the example, right? So if we lose PDCI and we lose that entire transmission, then you could see pro rata curtailments of, we wouldn't even have pro rata curtailments. We would curtail all schedules on the PDCI if we lose it. That could be LPT and PT, right? So It's two different instances where today we don't have this, where we're not talking about LPT priority exports based off of ISO serving their own internal load. We're talking about a loss of transmission, right? So I want to make sure that we separate those two things.
Alex, did that answer your questions?
It does. I just thought that with a transmission line out, that would be a qualifying event for you to deploy your contingency. And then to your point, you're losing, if you've got exports and the PDCI goes out, you'd lose that export anyway. So I'm trying to just understand the exposure.
So if we lose the PDCI, that could be, BCE for the ISO BA, right? And we deploy our contingency reserves. It's the recovery of those reserves. Right? So if, it's that piece of it. If
Right.
we don't have a problem recovering those reserves, then we wouldn't need to be doing LPT export curtailments. But if we do, if it's on a high load day or, you know, any other type of situation, we could find ourselves not being able to recover from those reserves. Yes, that could put us into an EEA situation, EEA3 situation.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Sorry. Dottie, are there any other hands raised?
There are no other hands raised.
Okay. Well, I see that we have a question from Christine in the chat. So she has two questions. The first question is, how can we set up PT exports for testing purposes only in the map stage master file? So yes, you should submit a city ticket for that. And then the second question is, when does day-ahead econ tagging go away? Currently, SCs are instructed to use day-ahead econ for economic bids in the day-ahead that clear RUC. Should we move to using the day-ahead LPT now or wait for the implementation date? My understanding from my SMEs is that day-ahead LPT should be utilized today for capacity that is low priority that clears RUC. Christine, does that answer your questions?
Yes, I was just wondering if that was going to be communicated to all the participants in a more formal way.
That's a good question. I'll take that one back and see what we can do about that.
Thank you.
All right. I don't see any other questions in the chat. Tati, does anybody else have a hand raised?
I do not see any other hands raised at this time.
Okay, let's move on. Here we go. So there's a final scenario, scenario 4, and it is an unstructured scenario. So we're going to want you to submit bids for different priority types on the same resources or transaction IDs in order for ADS to dispatch one resource with more than one priority type. So for instance, you can submit a day-ahead self-schedule LPT on a specific resource or transaction ID, and then also submit a real-time self-schedule LPT on an RT and an RT econ bid on that same resource or transaction ID. And then we want to verify that ADS looks correct, that those instructions, that there are those multiple rows for the instructions. So that is what that one is about. And of course, you'll be able to do some of those things perhaps with your the other scenarios. So I'm wondering what questions you might have on this one. And I am opening it up for questions.
So I'm looking right now and I don't see any hands raised. Additionally, I haven't seen anything yet put in the chat for questions.
Thanks, Dottie. Okay, we'll move on, and we will have another section where we're going to ask questions. So you'll get another chance if you think of some questions going forward. So let's recap all that we presented here. We're going to do a little wrap up. And first, we're going to talk about what it is that you should do to be successful with this new implementation. I would suggest that you participate in the market and the market sim forums. And also participate in the RUG meetings, our release user group. The market sim forums are on Mondays and Thursdays at 2 o'clock. The RUG meetings are every other week. Look on the calendar for the date and time on that. Sign up for an exemption for the fail to start rule if you are one of those resources that is eligible to do that. And again, you're going to do that through the master file. You're going to want to do that. You'll want to use the ADS instruction type to locate the priority of your awards. And also, you're going to have those 2 new CMRI reports to review the priority of your awards. Also, going forward, please tag all your awards correctly and avoid failing that ITS validation. There are some additional resources for you, and they include that Phase 2 Track 1 initiative training if you want to see more about those e-tagging rules, and scheduling priorities and export schedules overview. There is that document as well as the frequently asked questions. Again, I highly recommend both of those documents. We're going to stop for final questions. And I believe we also have some input about the failed to start questions that were outstanding at the beginning. First of all, let's see if there's any questions regarding what we've covered. Dottie?
Awesome. So I'm looking to see if I see any hands raised, and currently I do not. Additionally, there are no questions in the chat at this time.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Michael, did you want to talk about the failed to start questions that we had?
No, I don't have an answer yet to those. I was noting that just confirming, I'm reconfirming that we will get back to everyone here on the outstanding questions that we did not answer, and I know we captured 2. So expect that, because we said, well, sign up for the failed to start exemptions, but we still have outstanding questions.
Okay, thank you. I think I misread your comment. All right, so if there are not any additional questions, I do have one additional slide here. If you think of questions later for anything having to do with this training, please send those questions to customerreadiness@caiso.com. However, if you have questions that are specific to your organization, or you want to submit questions about the market sim, you can do that in City. You can see up at the top there is the email address for customer readiness, and then down below are the 2 different ways that you can submit a City ticket. The one on the left being in our market participant portal, and the right if you're not a one of our scheduling coordinators that have access to our portal, you can always use Contact Us, and that creates a City ticket as well. So with that, I thank you all for your patience. I'm sorry about the password issue. We'll make sure that does not happen again. And again, this recording will be posted along with the training. The training is already posted in the Learning Center, in the release planning page, and also the stakeholder initiatives page. We'll be including this recording once I get it and can post it. So again, thank you, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.